I want to ask you something before we get into this episode. Maybe you can just sit with it for a second before answering. Think about a difficult situation you're currently facing or one you've been sitting on for a while. It might be a conflict on your team or a difficult conversation you haven't had yet, but you know needs to happen. Maybe it's a decision that keeps getting pushed to next week, just something that you're stuck on. It shouldn't take too long because every leader's got it. It's something that's obvious in the front of your mind. Now ask yourself this: why haven't you moved on it? If your honest answer is something like, I'm waiting to see how things develop, or I don't know the next best step, or I'm hoping it resolves itself, then this episode is for you. Because what I've seen over and over again, and something I've experienced myself, is that the leaders who lose influence, not because they stopped caring, but because caring wasn't enough, they're almost always leaders who are waiting for a solution where nobody gets hurt. That solution almost never exists, and the waiting, well, it's costing you more than you know. So let's talk about it. Welcome back to Lead with More, character-driven leadership for today's leaders. I'm your host, Tom DeBell, and I'm glad you're here. Today we're talking about conflict, but not in the way most leadership content does. I'm not going to walk you through how to have a difficult conversation today. We're going to go upstream of that. The moment before the conversation, when a leader decides how they're going to respond to what's in front of them. Because that decision is where you set yourself up for success. Now, in all fairness, I need to give credit where credit is due. This episode was largely built around and inspired by a message I heard from my pastor on what the Bible tells us about David's response to conflict. I immediately saw the connection to effective leadership and recognized things I've experienced in my own leadership roles. Now, I bring this up just to make sure that I properly credit my sources. So, on with the episode. Now, every leader at some point faces a situation where there's no clean answer. In fact, as you gain leadership responsibility, those situations are where you're called upon the most. It may be a team member whose performance is declining and who you genuinely like, or a conflict between two people on your team, both of whom have a good point. It's often a decision where every available path has a real cost to someone, to something, or some relationship that you value. Now, these moments are not rare. They're actually the job. And what you do in those moments, how you respond when the answer isn't obvious and the stakes feel personal, that is the substance of your leadership. It's not your strategy, not your process, not your vision statement. What you do when it's difficult and there's no perfect option. Now, I want to talk about 3 types of responses you can have to these situations. Now, this isn't to judge yourself, but to know yourself, because a leader who doesn't know their own patterns can't change them. When a conflict or a difficult situation shows up, there are 3 ways that a leader can respond. And every leader, depending on the situation, the season, and the cost, is capable of all 3. Now, the first response is activity. An active response means that you care, and you care enough to do something about it. Now, an important clarification here. Activity doesn't mean you personally execute every solution. A leader who decides to delegate the resolution to someone else and who empowers a team member to handle it, who makes the call to bring in a third party, that's all activity. The defining feature of activity is not that you did everything yourself, it's that you moved, you made a decision. Something changed because you were engaged. Activity is leadership in motion. The second response is passivity. Now, passivity means you care, but you don't do anything. The situation is real to you and the problem registers and you feel the weight of it, but nothing happens. You don't move. The issue stays where it is, and so do you. Now, passivity doesn't always look like inaction from the outside. It can look like patience, or it can look like you're waiting for that right moment or gathering more information, even giving people a chance to work it out. Sometimes that's legitimate, but more often what's called patience is actually avoidance wearing a professional disguise. Passivity is what happens when caring isn't enough to produce movement. You sit with this too long and too often, it can lead to this third response, which is apathy. Apathy means you don't care and you don't do anything about it. And what's critical to understand is that most leaders don't arrive at apathy by choice. They drift there. Apathy is usually at the end of a longer road that started with caring deeply, then getting stuck, then getting tired of being stuck, and eventually, without making a conscious decision, stopping. If passivity is the warning sign, apathy is the destination you reach if you ignore it long enough. Now, let me be very direct with you. If apathy is where you are as a leader, if your influence is already eroding, your team knows. They may not be able to name it, but they feel it. So the question is, why do caring leaders end up in passivity in the first place? And here's what I've seen. And if you're honest, you may recognize this in yourself. The freeze, that move from activity to passivity, most often comes from a leader who cares very deeply and wants to do the right thing and is searching for a solution where nobody gets hurt. They don't want to have the performance conversation because they genuinely like the person and they don't want to damage the relationship. They don't want to make the call on the team conflict because both people have merit, and they don't want either of them to feel dismissed. They don't want to make a decision because every option has cost, and they don't want to be the one who imposed that cost on somebody. The intention behind the freeze is good. The compassion is real. But here's the honest truth. The solution where nobody suffers almost never exists. Most real leadership decisions involve real costs. Someone's going to be uncomfortable or disrupted. When a leader keeps waiting for conditions that will never arrive, they're not protecting their team, they're protecting themselves from the discomfort of having to be the one who acted. Now, that's not a character attack. It's a very human response, but it's important for us to name it for what it is. Because here's what happens while a leader waits for the perfect solution. The situation doesn't stay frozen. It moves. It almost always moves in the wrong direction. The performance issue gets worse. The team conflict hardens into something more difficult to resolve. The unaddressed decision creates its own downstream consequences. And the leader, watching all of this happen while not moving, starts to feel something inside shift. The caring starts to cost too much. Slowly, not all at once, not by choice, it starts to diminish. Now that is the drift from passivity to apathy, and it almost always begins with a compassionate leader who wanted to get it right. So what does it actually look like to move, to choose activity when there's no clean answer? Well, first, it requires accepting that this imperfect action is still action. The best available decision made with integrity and care is better than the perfect decision that never comes. Every experienced leader you admire has a history of making hard calls with incomplete information. It's not a failure of leadership, that is the definition. Second, it requires separating compassion from avoidance. You can care deeply about the people involved and still move forward. In fact, I'd argue the most caring thing a leader can do for their team is to not leave them in this unresolved situation longer than necessary. The team waiting on a decision suffers in the waiting. The employee in a performance conversation they never got to have suffers without the feedback they need to grow. Staying frozen in the name of care is not actually care, it's care that stops short of its own purpose. Now third, and this is the character dimension, it requires being the kind of leader that can carry this weight of the imperfect outcome. A leader with real character doesn't wait for a painless path. They act rightly when every path has a cost. That's not a small thing. It really takes something out of you. But it's also what builds the kind of leadership that lasts. The kind that your team trusts, not because you always got it right, but because you always stay engaged. Now, I want to close with two questions, and these aren't rhetorical. I want you to actually answer them honestly and privately, and right now, if you can. So here's the first one. What are the things you say you care about? Your team's development, a culture of accountability, honest communication, maybe the health of your key relationships. Whatever is on that list for you, name it. The second question is, what are the things that you show you care about through your actual behavior? Not what you intend, not what you value in theory. What does your behavior, your responses to the hard situation and the conflicts, the decisions, what does that actually demonstrate? Now, where those two lists match, that's where you're leading well. Where there's a gap between them, that's where something has drifted. And the drift almost always looks like passivity, caring that hasn't produced movement, values that exist in your head but haven't shown up in your actions. That gap doesn't lie. It's just quiet enough that a lot of leaders never look directly at it. Now you have. What you do with that is up to you. I know this can be a heavy topic, but here's what I want to leave you with today. If you recognized yourself in some of this, if there's a situation you've been frozen in, waiting for a solution that's not coming, I'm not here to pile on. Every leader's been there, the freeze is human, and the compassion behind it is real. But the leaders who build lasting influence, the one their teams remember, the ones who actually change things, are not the ones who found that perfect answer. They're the ones who kept moving when moving was hard, who stayed engaged when disengagement would have been easier, who acted rightly when every option had a cost. That is character-driven leadership. And it doesn't happen all at once. It's built one hard decision at a time. So wherever you are today, take stock of your responses and name that drift if it's there, and then move. Find a mentor or a friend who can help you see the path forward. You don't have to figure it out alone. Strong leaders always have solid support networks. And I want to thank you for joining me today. And if this resonated with you, please like and subscribe. It really helps this channel. Until next time, keep leading with more.